Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today I'm excited to be joined by our guest, Dr. Denise Okafor. This episode is made possible with support from our sponsor, New England Biolabs. Listeners, are you curious how molecular biology is moving forward around the world? Hear from the scientists who are driving discovery and expanding applications of existing technologies on the New England Biolabs podcast, Lessons from Lab and Life. Host Lydia Morrison interviews revered scientists working in genetics, synthetic biology, diagnostics, molecular cloning, and other fields. Get ready to explore the cutting edge of science and learn what these remarkable scientists have to offer. Don't miss out on the opportunity to hear exclusive stories about the world of laboratory research. Tune into Lessons from Lab and Life today, wherever you listen to podcasts. And today, our guest Denise will share stories from her own life and research. So listeners, get ready to meet another one of our brilliant people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. I am thrilled to be speaking today with our guest scientist, Dr. Denise Okafor. So, Denise, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for the welcome and the invitation.
Well, Denise, we are so happy to have you with us today. And I'd like to start by telling our listeners a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today. So, listeners, Denise is Assistant Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology and of Chemistry at Pennsylvania State University. She received her bachelor's in biomedical chemistry from Oral Roberts University. Denise was next awarded her master's degree in chemistry and a Ph.D. in biochemistry from Georgia Institute of Technology. Afterwards, Denise was selected to complete an Institutional Research and Academic Career Development Award from the NIH to conduct postdoctoral research at Emory University and to teach at Morehouse and Spelman colleges in Atlanta. Denise has received a variety of awards and honors for her work, including a Burroughs Wellcome Fund Career Award at the Scientific Interface, an NSF CAREER Award for Early Investigators, and the NIH Director's New Innovator Award. In addition, she has been named a Keystone Symposia Fellow and a Kavli Foundation Fellow. And in our interview today, we're excited to get to know you, Denise, as a scientist, of course, but also as a person. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not doing science?
So to be completely honest, the science takes over a lot of my life. I wish that wasn't true. But what I like to do is I like to read and I like to write fiction or just write for fun. And then I add the caveat that I haven't done any of those things in a while, or just like even my ability to read is restricted because I also have kids. And so a lot of my free time is spent with my kids.
That's wonderful.
Which I do enjoy.
So what are their favorite activities these days?
One of my daughters is very into dance. And so there's a lot of kind of dancing at home or watching dance videos, dance tutorials on YouTube. And then younger kids just want me to not have a computer open. They don't care. They don't care so much what I do as long as I'm not sitting there in front of my computer, as long as I'm like talking or engaging with them. So it's just like playing on the floor.
Absolutely. They want the attention. I feel it. Now, you mentioned reading as well. We love talking about books on our show, and I love encouraging our listeners to read broadly. So, Denise, even if it's been a little while, do you have a favorite book that you can recommend for us?
A book that I read recently that I really enjoyed and that was, I think, really useful for me was a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It's written by a Christian minister, so it's not for everyone necessarily, but it is just about this idea that we are always in a hurry and we're not really designed to be. And it kind of goes through the years, talks about just how all of the things that have happened, like all the technological advances have been excellent, but have also allowed us. So one very kind of nice example is the idea that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we would be standing in the coffee line, but maybe 20 years ago, we'd be standing in the coffee line and you just have to stand there and talk to people in front of you or behind you, right? And that there's no choice. Like you just had to either talk to them or you just stood there. But now you can go into this other world on our phones because we have our phones. So it's this idea that technology, while it's nice, has also created a lot of hurry, a lot of distraction, a lot of an inability to turn it off and do other things. And so that book, I've been thinking a lot about just about these ideas and just slowing down in general. That's what that book has allowed me to do.
I love that. It sounds like a great book recommendation. And I completely feel that. The sort of constant connection to email is what usually gets me. You feel like you can't put your phone down because you might miss an email. Well, thank you so much for this recommendation. And so we talked about life outside the lab. I'd love to talk about your work as well. You're doing some really cool things on the scientific side. So Denise, how do you describe what you do to someone who might not be specifically in your field or in science at all?
So the way I like to think about it is I always come from the aspect of a drug. Like people, when we take medicine, everyone knows what that is because everyone has taken some kind of medication. When you take medicine, what it has to do is go into your body. And usually every drug that we take, for the most part, they are trying to find a very specific target that they will interact with and then change what that target is doing, right? So there's a protein or there's some other molecule in your body, and these drugs have to interact with that molecule and then either kind of turn off something that has been turned on, and is causing the issue that requires medication, or turn something on that is not working correctly, right? Again, that causes the issue that requires medication. And so my research understands at a very basic level, how do these small molecules like drugs, how do they find and kind of interact with that partner that they're supposed to interact with? There is a partner they're supposed to interact with. If they interact with something else, that is one of the things that gives rise to side effects. So if you've seen commercials on TV, it's like side effects may include dizziness and nausea, right? And then those side effects come because things are not interacting with things that they should be interacting with. And so I just want to understand, how do these molecules, how do these drugs figure out what they should be interacting with? How can we design ones that are very specifically only interacting with things that they should be and not interacting with non-target molecules?
Absolutely. And you're particularly passionate about proteins, as I understand it.
Yeah, yes.
Well, that's wonderful. So can you tell us a little bit about these proteins and why perhaps these proteins caught your interest?
So I didn't really know much about proteins. Honestly, I started working with them in my postdoctoral lab, this is what you do after a PhD, right? The kind of second research that I did at Emory. And what was unique about these particular proteins is this ability that they have for their function to be turned on and turned off by depending on what small molecule they bind, what drug they bind, right? Or what compound they bind. And then there's this kind of world of activity that they can have, because if they bind compound A, that would give rise to, certain specific activity in the cells, like turn on a bunch of things. And then if they bind compound B, that would turn on a completely different set of things. I think that whole combinatorial effect, or this idea of the many possibilities of things that are turned on and turned off, just depending on what compound is introduced to the protein, that just caught my attention, I think, and just captivated me. And that is why I decided that I wanted to keep pursuing this even after my postdoc was over.
Oh, very cool. And I think, Denise, you can hear your interest and excitement come through just as you talk about your research. And I think having this passion can help keep you motivated in the work that you do. But sometimes there's a slump, right? It can be helpful to have a little motivational quote as saying something that goes into your mind to keep you moving. So do you have a favorite quote or a saying or just something that really motivates and inspires you?
I think for me, so I have a group of friends. We have known each other since college days, so almost 20 years now. And none of them are scientists. I'm the scientist in the group. I mean, they're all, amazing at their professions, but I'm the one scientist. And so what I try to talk about my research and explain, what I'm doing or what is the interesting question. And something that comes up is, well, Denise, can you cure cancer? Or can you cure, insert big disease here. But then one disease that comes up a lot is fibroids, which I'm going to try not to go on too much of a tangent, but it is a condition that women face, and it can cause infertility and cause all kinds of complications. And it is known to be prevalent in Black women, right? So my group is all Black women. And that is one thing that is a disease that is actually very closely linked to the kind of protein that I study. And so I think about what I'm doing, which is really understanding how proteins are binding these compounds as very foundational, but in the hopes that in the long term, or maybe even in the near future, it will give us insight into how to control the proteins that are important for diseases like fibroids, and hopefully help us design drugs for those kinds of diseases. And that something like that can or maybe influence or affect the lives of my friends in a positive way. So I think just this idea that I have this knowledge that if I persevere, I might learn something that could have an impact, even if it's not in my lifetime, I guess. It would be cool if it was in my lifetime, but just this idea that I could have this kind of impact on my community, in my close circle in that kind of way is something that keeps me motivated for sure.
I love that, Denise. I think being able to see those links of how your work can have an impact and really help people can be super motivating and inspiring. And I think along the course of your career as a scientist, you are helped by a lot of people, whether it's mentors, role models, or just these people who you look up to when you're going through your career. So do you have examples that rise to the top of your mind of people who served as role models for you, or maybe people who particularly inspired you?
When I think about this, just people along my journey that have helped me, I think about the people who helped me get past the kind of the biggest failures of my career. And I didn't mean to make that sound so dramatic, but
it feels dramatic in the moment. Yeah.
I'll kind of take away some of the drama now. When I was in grad school, there's this exam that you take. It's called the comprehensive exam. And this is the exam that basically indicates to the program that you are ready to keep going and continue in the program and get a PhD, and you're capable of getting a PhD. And in grad school, when I took this exam, I did not pass it. So I failed it twice, actually. You gave me a second chance. And second chance, I still couldn't demonstrate that I had what it take, right, to their satisfaction. And in the hindsight, right, I can tell the story very nicely, and it's a very nice story to tell. And in the moment, it wasn't so much fun. But I remember that kind of being this pivotal moment where I had to decide if I was going to leave the program, and go get a job and just kind of continue life on some trajectory, or, try again and see if I could, re-enter the program and get a PhD and pursue these things that I thought were my goals. And I think that decision for me was enabled only by I call them mentors. I don't know if that's even the word, but the faculty members that believed in me. It's a cheesy way to put it, but they actually told me that they were convinced that I could do it and that I should keep going. I think that I was at a point where I didn't have it in myself to pull myself out of the failure that I was in and say, I didn't have enough evidence to know that I could keep going and get a PhD. And so these people who, I guess, took it upon themselves on their own volition, right? They would email me, or they invited me over to their offices and were like, you should keep going because you can actually do this. And I think they gave me the will/confidence to say, okay, I will try again, and then I'll keep going. And the rest is history because now I'm here. And so, yeah, I credit a lot of that to those kinds of mentors. Those are the people I think that have inspired me the most in my journey, just because I know that without them, I would probably not be here.
Well, Denise, that's wonderful. I sort of think of them almost as champions, these people who sort of see the potential in you that you sometimes can't see yourself and help sort of push you in some cases up to that next level in your career.
I like champion.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked about some of these different points along your career, but I'd love to rewind back even further if we can, Denise. Let's talk about how it all began. How did you first get interested in science and maybe start thinking about this being a career for you?
So I'm born to Nigerian parents. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee. But I think there's a stereotype that all Nigerians are doctors or engineers, lawyers. It's all those careers. So I was, how do I put this without sounding like I'm bragging? I was the smart one among my siblings. I just liked school. Yeah. And I did well at school and, elementary school or whatever. And so my parents were like, you will be the doctor, right? This was their declaration. And it's interesting because when they said that, then I had to kind of pick my courses geared at, I was like, okay, I will be a doctor. I didn't question it. I just thought, yep, I am smart. I will be a doctor. This works. This makes sense. And so I picked classes that were, just to get me towards a pre-med degree. And I was on track to do pre-med and I was happy. I mean, I didn't hate it too much. I figured it made sense. I was smart enough to do it. So why not do it? And it's a good thing to do. You help people, etc. And then in undergrad, I got exposed to research and then I knew that was what I had to do instead. And so I immediately put the pre-med plans on the back burner and moved forward in that direction.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that first research experience. What were you studying? What really sort of convinced you that this was way better than the pre-med path?
So I had gone to the University of Memphis to participate in a summer research experience for undergraduates. So it's called an REU, sponsored by the NSF. I think that this is probably a narrative that you heard many times at this point. Like I didn't know what research was. And I thought that to get a PhD, you had to study, right? And just, read books like regular school and then get the PhD. And so I didn't know the concept of research. And at this program, I did computational work, which means that all the research was on computer, and I had to learn how to do all of this because I'd never done any of it before. And we ran some calculations on some complexes that we'd built, trying to understand why they performed the kind of catalytic activity that they performed. There's very little of what we did that I remember because it was so long ago. But I do remember just knowing that I enjoyed the thrill of asking a question and then trying to then do all this work to get to the answer. It's like, God, this is very cool. If this is a job, this sounds like it could be a very cool job to do.
So then, Denise, can you walk us through what were then some of the key moments that really took you from that point of sort of committing to the research path to where you are today?
This experience that I just described was in the summer of my junior year. And so as soon as that was done, I went back to school that fall. So this is my senior year now, where I think this is when I was supposed to be taking the MCAT. I guess I hadn't been paying attention. The MCAT is a medical school exam. I just went back deciding, you know what, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to take the GRE, which is what you take for grad school. And I'm just going to do this because this is what makes sense. There was a battle with my parents. My parents were not very happy about this. Not a real battle, just they expressed their disapproval and their displeasure, right? But it wasn't like, we will disown you. It was
commanding you, yeah.
Yeah, it was just kind of, they told me that they much rather I went to medical school. I think I just was determined that this was the right thing to do, was to get a PhD. I also was passionate about teaching, so I wanted to pursue a career in academia. That was the goal. And so I did that. I only applied to a handful of graduate programs. I applied to 4, and I think that even now, I wouldn't advise anyone to apply to only 4. I don't know what I did, but I only applied to 4. And I remember getting my first acceptance in the fall of my senior year, that same fall. And I remember just going back to school in the spring with just like this extreme case of senioritis. Like, why am I here? I don't need you guys. Like, I have grad school admission. Like, I don't. And it was funny. I had a chip on my shoulder the whole time. So I ended up accepting admission from Georgia Tech and enrolling in the chemistry PhD program at Georgia Tech. Yeah, and then I already described some of the challenges that accompanied that whole process. And then when I was able to come out on the other side of that, I was able to finish the program. And then I think that one thing that was a shift for me with my career is that when I left grad school, I had enjoyed the research that I did, but I was not passionate about the research. I thought this was cool and I'm happy that I worked on this, but I don't mind leaving this behind. I don't have any strong attachment to this project and, someone else can work on it and that's great. And then I went to this postdoc, which is where I was going to teach and do research because my goal at that point was to try and become a better teacher so that I could get a full-time position as a professor in a university that was really focused on teaching, less so research. But the turning point was that in my postdoc, I actually fell in love with that research project. I was like, whoa, this project is the thing that I want to keep doing, right? I kind of found questions that were different than the ones that the lab was asking, but related. But then I found kind of a niche where I felt like this is the thing that I can do, that I bring this unique perspective to this and no one else is asking these questions, but I think that they're important questions. So if I can convince a funding agency, that's all I need, right? Then I can open a lab. And this was the turning point, I think, was where I encountered this project, which is what I described, the proteins that I decided that I really felt passionate about and I could do. And then I wanted to do and wanted to have a research career. And that was what at that point, I started to pursue. So less so of a teaching career, right? Some teaching, but less of a full-time teaching position and more of a full-time research position with teaching added. Yeah, so that's how I have ended up here.
Absolutely. And I'm sure it's reassuring for listeners out there to hear that, you had to try a few different things to figure out what you were really excited about and really wanted to do, because I think there's so much pressure now to sort of feel like you need to have the answer right away and need to have that whole path sort of mapped out. But I think for so many successful scientists, that's just not the case. That's not how they got to where they are today. Well, I'd love to dig into the details of your research next, Denise. So let's talk about a particular project. Is there one you have ongoing at the moment that you are just the most excited about and want to tell us more about today?
So I'm excited about all of them, but I will tell you about one of them because it also addresses this large question. So again, the larger question is, how do these small molecules, these ligands, these compounds, drug-like molecules, how do they recognize the receptor, the protein that they're supposed to bind? And then how do they achieve that functional activity? So turning it on, turning it off, whatever that activity is that they're supposed to do. How does that all work? And so an angle that I am working on in my lab that I'm really excited about is thinking about the evolution of these proteins, like what these drugs are trying to bind. Thinking about how have they evolved in cells. A lot of proteins in our cells are related, like they come from these families. They do different functions, but they have kind of the same origin. And so thinking about what was the ancestor of these proteins, what did that ancestral protein do? And then how did that function change? Or how did that function evolve into what the modern proteins do now? And I think that asking this question from that perspective gives us insight into how these modern proteins are able to bind or interact with drugs today. So we ask questions like what kinds of molecules, what kinds of drugs would bind the ancestral protein? How do they bind the ancestral protein? What activity does the ancestral protein do? Can we then learn from the ancestor how the modern drugs are doing it or why the modern drugs are doing it the way that they do it? And so this ancestral perspective I find so fascinating, and my lab is hopefully going to learn a lot of things about just the evolution of these interactions between these proteins and small molecules.
I think that is so exciting. I think it's really cool to be able to be applying these new kind of cutting edge biological techniques to really unravel these mysteries, sort of the stories of the proteins and how they came to be how they are today.
Yes, I agree completely.
Well, very interesting work, Denise. And listeners, if you're looking to hear about even more great science, New England Biolab's podcast, Lessons from Lab and Life, is your source for staying informed about the most up-to-date molecular biology breakthroughs. Host Lydia Morrison interviews prominent scientists and delves into their research to uncover how their findings affect society in meaningful ways. Tune in to learn from the experts and get a glimpse of the cutting-edge advancements being made by scientists around the globe. Don't miss out on this opportunity to gain new knowledge and stay informed on the latest discoveries. Tune in to Lessons from Lab and Life today, wherever you listen to podcasts. And Denise, we heard about one major challenge that you overcame early on with your Ph.D. comprehensive exam, but these challenges are really common in science, even if scientists sometimes feel isolated or like maybe they're the only ones going through these struggles. Everyone has those moments where it feels like everything is going wrong. So Denise, do you have another example of something else that you've really struggled with, or even just an everyday challenge that you encounter that you can tell us more about and talk us through how you work through these things?
So something that I remember that was a huge challenge at the time was I started my lab in January of 2020, right? And in March, all that happened. I don't need to kind of go into a lot of detail. And then suddenly I was in a new city. I just moved to the city where Penn State is located in December of the year before. And just as I was settling in, right, everyone had to go back home and work from home. And I was having to homeschool my daughter. She was 6 at the time. And well, at homeschool, I put that in air quotes because that was not what I was trying to. We're trying to survive every day, just to make sure she didn't stay idle is what we were doing. And I was also pregnant at the time because I got pregnant shortly after I arrived here. It was a very isolating time. I didn't know anyone in the town, and I was having to try and be responsible for my child's education, which I had not really had to do that in the past. And I was also trying to do my new job, the job that I'd just been newly hired for. And I just wasn't sure what was happening and what would end up happening or how long anything would be closed for or how long anything would take. It was kind of a time where I had to kind of release a lot of expectations about just like how productive I would be. And I think this is true for a lot of scientists. We had to kind of be like, you know what, my kid is here and I can't really do anything. So it is what it is. And I think the other thing that was very helpful for me was setting up virtual communities. Again, I didn't know anyone in the town, but I was able to network with other, again, just by email, find other newly hired assistant professors at the university, and we formed a community online, and we kind of got each other through just like those early stages when we didn't know anyone else in town, and we were all kind of nervous about our research or lack of progress. And some others were moms also who were, trying to figure out how to handle kids. So for me, and I think for many, that challenge was just getting through that rough time. And I think that a way that I did it was by finding other people. A lot of the challenge was isolation, and finding ways to overcome that isolation was critical for me and helping to get through it.
Absolutely. I think everyone during the pandemic had to kind of take a moment, be kind to yourself, try and talk things out with others, maintain some of those connections there, because it was a super isolating time and a really difficult time, as you alluded to be trying to meet new people because everyone's being isolated and trying to get new collaborations and new things moving in your lab. So I can only imagine the stresses and struggles that you endured. But we don't want to just talk about the difficult times in your career, Denise. I'd love to talk about your successes as well. So do you have a favorite success story that you'd like to share with us?
One of my favorites is, so I've been fortunate that my lab has gotten research funding because it's not a very easy thing to do. And every time I've gotten a new one, it's always been just like a celebration, a huge thrill and a huge, joy, exciting time. One of my favorites has been the awards that have come in spite of heavy skepticism that I could get those, right? So I remember applying as a postdoc for the first grant that I ever got, which is called the Transition Award, because they give you money to finish off your postdoc and then money to start your new lab in a new institution. And so I applied for this. I remember telling my advisor that I was going to apply, and his response was, "Are you sure?" And the "Are you sure?" was just, honestly, was because I didn't necessarily have the CV that the other people applying for the award might have. And I wasn't offended. It was funny because his thoughts echoed exactly mine. It was like, yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right. And when I was successful with receiving that award, I think that was just such a huge boost of confidence. And that for me is always going to be just almost the first external vote of confidence that I could do this job, or that there was some value in my ideas and that this was maybe a feasible path to pursue. And then there have been other exciting things or successes since, like when we published our first paper from the lab. Just when we performed the first experiment in the lab that when we set up the new lab and then performed the experiment and it worked, we're like, whoa, we actually have a functioning lab. And so there have been those kinds of things as well.
Absolutely. I think some of these major milestones that you mentioned really are meaningful. Those successes can stay with you and keep you fueled for a long time. And congratulations, of course, on that Transition Award. That sounds like those long shots, I think, are particularly satisfying wins. Well, we've talked about some of the exciting things that you're able to do as a scientist. And I think one of the things that people don't talk about often enough is travel. I think this is a huge perk of the career. Scientists get to travel all over the world for meetings and conferences and to work with collaborators. So do you have a favorite place, Denise, that your science has taken you?
I would say that the place that I've been that I never would have gone was Hawaii. When I went to Hawaii for indigenous communities and science, diversity in science. It's by the organization SACNAS. They had their conference in Hawaii a few years ago. And that was a lot of fun. That was just a great trip, and I really enjoyed being there. I haven't been able to go overseas yet for a conference. So hopefully one day an opportunity will come for that. But I would say Hawaii was a good one.
That sounds amazing. And I think you're still early in your career, so there will be many opportunities ahead of you. And Hawaii sounds absolutely amazing. So what were some of the most memorable things you were able to do when you were in Hawaii?
We went and saw Pearl Harbor. And then I think just like going to the beach and just looking at the waters and just how insanely blue they were was just a memory that I won't forget. We ate really nice food. Yeah. And when I say we, I mean me and other conference participants. My family, there was just no way to take them. So it was just me by myself. So I wish I could have taken the family somehow, but that was not.
For the future, right?
For the future, for sure. Yes.
Sounds amazing. Well, I'm glad you had an opportunity to go to Hawaii. And of course, like we said, many travel opportunities await in the future as you progress through your career. And I think as scientists, there are a lot of stereotypes out there still about what scientists are like and what life as a scientist is like. And we try to break those on our show by just talking about these human moments, the fun personalities, the quirky traditions, the sort of funny memories that you share with your colleagues. So do you have an example of one of these whether it's a quirky tradition or just a funny memory that you can share with us that really shows this human side of science that people may not often get to see.
Yes, not so much in my own lab because we're still new and I think we're still trying to figure out, our personality. Mm-hmm. And it's actually changed quite a bit in the past couple of years. And again, the personality of the lab is really just determined by the people that are in the lab. But one of the earlier labs that I was in, we really enjoyed eating. It would be like a birthday, a Tuesday, and we would say, have a potluck, and we would all bring food, and then it would be like have lunch together, baby shower, just opportunity to like sit down together and just like share food was a big thing. And so I remember that we once had, I think this was for Thanksgiving, we decided to do an international potluck, which was everyone bring the food of your ancestors to the lab. Yeah. And then we put everyone's names on the board and we drew their flag of their ancestors next to their name. And then, kind of listed out, everyone kind of signed up for what they were bringing. And then we got to see how diverse the lab really was, because even it's obvious sometimes when people are minorities, right? Visibly minorities, but even like my friends that weren't minorities, our colleagues, they would say, oh, my family came from Italy, right? Or my ancestors are Irish. And they would try to bring something that would celebrate that heritage. And so even that was really nice. So that was my previous labs. I think that here, the lab is driven a lot by the personalities. And so it's hard as the PI to do much of any kind of social planning. I just am limited in my bandwidth to do that kind of planning, but I look forward to personalities in my lab that will kind of, take on this kind of activity and this kind of adventure.
Absolutely. And I think food is a powerful force that really brings people together. So any place you have food, it's a magnetic force that brings everyone together. Thank you so much for talking about one of these previous labs you've worked in. And I think it's awesome to be able to celebrate the heritage of the people that work there and to really kind of get to know the people that you work with a little bit better outside of just the daily scientific interactions that you may be having with them, because you're tackling some big problems and it helps to have that great team, that community spirit. So if we talked about, the restrictions that you normally face as a scientist, it's funding, staff, feasibility of the work that you're doing, time in many cases. So Denise, if we took away the barriers that normally hold you back and we gave you everything you could dream of for a day, what would you want to solve most?
So I would absolutely want to solve the fibroids challenge. I would want to learn how this receptor, the receptor is called the progesterone receptor, how the progesterone receptor must be modulated. What is the issue? How can that be fixed? How can we design the drug that fixes or cures fibroids or mitigates fibroids? I just think it's a super ambitious problem because there's not one thing that causes them. And I think that even the thing that causes them is very poorly understood. So that would be my goal. I just think that it would have such an impact on a large percentage of the population. And I think this is known about these kinds of diseases, is that when they affect minority populations, or even just when diseases are rare and don't affect a lot of the population, they just don't get as much kind of airtime with research funds or even researchers studying them. So that would be something that I would go all in to figure out and hopefully solve.
Absolutely. I think digging into some of these complex mechanisms for, like you said, a rare condition that doesn't get a lot of attention in terms of scientific funding and scientific research coming out of it would be a worthy cause. Absolutely. So we appreciate you dreaming big with us today, Denise. And I'd love to end our conversation today by talking about advice. For our listeners out there who may be on their own scientific journeys, this advice can be critical. So do you have a piece of advice that someone gave you at some point, Denise, that really helped you that you can pay forward to all of our listeners today?
I don't know if someone gave it to me. It's just something that, based on my own journey, I have decided is valuable advice. And that is, do not see failure as the verdict for your life in any way, right? And I think that I'm sure many people have said this on the podcast, but failure is something that people can use as a reason not to try again, right? Or to say, I can't do this thing, and then completely, switch the thing that they have always felt like they wanted to do. There's failure, but then there's also the other aspect of that for me is to not let anyone tell you that you can't do something. You decide for yourself if there's something that you do want to accomplish, don't give that power to any individual to tell you that or to kind of decide for you that you're not able to accomplish something. I think that this is not mine. I've heard someone else say this: failure is information that something, might need to be changed, or like you might need to tweak the plan or try a different route to get to your goal. But it doesn't have to be a stop sign, do not go any further, you're done. It doesn't have to be that, and it shouldn't be that. I say this because part of my experience was people telling me that I'm not cut out for grad school, and so go do something else, right? And so, and I think about those people, and I think, what would have happened if I listened to them? Because then I wouldn't be here, right? So I'm very passionate about people deciding to be the authors of their own stories and not letting anyone have that much power in your life to tell you that you can't do something. And then, they can tell you, but you don't have to accept it. Just say thank you and then walk away. And
right.
Yes.
Well, I love this message, Denise, this idea that you are the protagonist of your own story and you can pursue the path that you want to, and just not seeing failure as an end. I think you were a perfect example of that. Like you said, these struggles in grad school were just the beginning of a really exciting career that you've got going on now. So, Denise, if our listeners are curious and you've caught their attention, what is a good way for them to learn more about you and the wonderful work that you do?
So I am a faculty at Penn State, which means that I have a website on the Penn State's network. And so my lab's website is sites.psu.edu/Okafor lab, OKAFOR LAB. And then just at that website is a list of what we work on, a list of our publications, people that work in my lab, and the things that we are excited about. And then I am also on social media, but Twitter and Blue Sky, which is a new one, at the handle CDOKAFOR. That's just CD and my last name, OKAFOR. Yeah, that is where I can be found.
Awesome. Well, listeners, definitely check out Denise's lab website, get connected on social media. And Denise, it's been such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. This was excellent. I really enjoyed it.
Well, it was so much fun to learn more about you and your work today. And listeners, it's always wonderful to have you here with us as well. We hope you join us again for another episode of People Behind the Science.